Big Apple Academy, where excellence becomes tradition.
The Miners, which was the fourth and the final book in this version of the series. It's possible we may write more, but that's up to the publisher, of course. But anyway, Massacre of the Miners is it takes place in 1914, and it's about our nation's most violent labor struggle. Coal miners went on strike to protest working conditions and wages, and after about 7 months, during which there were some skirmishes, a little bit of violence breaking out in their tent colony, because it takes place in a tent colony in Ludlow. On a Greek Easter, on April 20th, 1914, gunfire rained down, and they became fully under attack. So men, women, and children were running for their lives, and hiding in dirt cellars, and it was incredibly horrific. So that's the other three, and then there's People of the Plague, which is the only book in the series where I actually had trouble finding comprehensive histories, comprehensive accounts of individuals who went through it. In the other three books, I was able to find these stories, these first-person accounts or accounts of people's experiences, histories. But for People of the Plague, the way that it ripped through Philadelphia so quickly and devastatingly, that meant that there were very few first-person accounts. People weren't keeping diaries because things were happening so fast. So for this book, what I had to do was create composite characters, which means, basically, I could find stories here and there in historical accounts of the plague, but what I would have to do was stitch stories together and create fictional characters out of a number of real people's accounts, right? So the majority of the characters in People of the Plague are based on a collection of other people, with the exception of Dr. Cruzen and the mayor, Mayor Smith. They were both based on real accounts and real people. Dr. Cruzen was the director of the Philadelphia Department of Public Health. And so he, of course, is burdened with tackling this epidemic and doing whatever he can to stop it, to flatten the curve, as we would say today. But he is struggling, he is butting up against the mayor, who does not want to shut things down, doesn't really even want to acknowledge the problem, because he's a politician and because politicians want to be popular. They don't want to do unpopular things. And one of the tragic reasons that Philadelphia had such a horrible experience with this plague is because of an event that takes place at the beginning of the book, the Liberty Loan Parade, which was of course a patriotic event. So people, and everybody loves a parade, so people want to gather, want to celebrate, and it's also a patriotic event. So it was meant to raise funds for the war effort. So understandably, the mayor didn't want to cancel that. It would have been very disappointing to a lot of people, and it would have probably, because people didn't really appreciate the the health crisis that was coming, it would have been a very unpopular decision. So it goes on as planned, and that became a major vector of the spreading of the pandemic, and it spread very, very fast. So the clash between, even though they don't have so many scenes together, they have maybe a handful of scenes together. I feel like the shadow of that clash hangs over the entire book, because the decisions they make have an impact on all of the other characters. And so Philadelphia was the reason I chose to set the book in Philadelphia, was because Philadelphia was, if not the most impacted city, it was one of them, definitely one of them. New York and Boston were also hit very hard, and there are a few reasons for that. Probably because they were port cities, a lot of influx of people. In Philadelphia, the sickness began in the Navy Yard, and then spread to the Navy hospital, and then spread to the civilian population. But the reason, like I said, Philadelphia was particularly hard hit was the Liberty Loan Parade. And another challenge of writing, of putting this book together, because the Horrors of History series, we also include a lot of historical photos. I worked closely with the publisher on the photo research as well, which is a really interesting activity, to kind of try to locate photos that will illustrate something going on in the book. With People of the Plague, it was, although we do have some photos from Philadelphia, was also very difficult, just like it was difficult to find kind of complete accounts of individuals or families. It was difficult to find like a whole book's worth of Philadelphia-centered photos. So what we did was we included photos that kind of reflected what was going on, but maybe they were photos taken in Seattle or Boston or another city. So I wrote this in 2014, so about 6 years ago. And of course, I never thought it would be so relevant 6 years later. But I did start to get a little bit spooked about maybe about 6 weeks ago, maybe a little longer, maybe 7 weeks ago, when when all of us started learning more about what was happening. And I would read in the news, I would read accounts of mayors across the country who were hesitant to cancel public events. And it just it gave me a chill a little bit, because I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. So I actually started rereading. I revisited People of the Plague, 5 or 6 weeks ago, and it was kind of incredible to see the overlap with what's happening now. Even the political struggles between leaders, government leadership and health officials, the way that they are having a kind of tug of war with what message to deliver to the public about the dangers, and about when we can open things up, or what businesses can remain open, or what events we can start scheduling again. So yeah, I never really thought it would become so relevant so soon after writing it. But you know, here we are. Um, so my overall goal was with People of the Plague was to just do justice to these stories, because I did, even though I wasn't able to get you know, individual accounts or family accounts that were kind of comprehensive, I did read a lot of just devastating stories of people's experience. And so I, you know, one thing is one troubling thing is how little people know about this event. They know a lot more these days because it's talked about in light of COVID-19 in the news. But before I started researching and writing this book, I didn't know anything about the 1918 influenza epidemic, and it impacted the entire world. Um, uh, and so it was an event that I didn't even know about, and so it's just very troubling that even something that took place 100 years ago, which isn't that long in human history, is lost in time, right? Just simply because you know, we're focused on other things, or just didn't learn it in school, or whatever. There are any number of reasons not to know something, but this is something that we should know, especially now. History repeats itself, right? So because things have been largely forgotten, I just, my goal was to like try to tell a respectful and meaningful story of a cross section of people's experience of this plague. So I don't know if would you like me to read a passage from it, or?
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Anderson, if you don't mind.
Sure.
My understanding is that's not your full-time job, being a writer, right? You are doing probably something else
Correct.
in life?
Correct. Well, at the time that I was working on these books, the first two books, I was actually working for a small company that creates books for publishers, and so we pitched this idea to the publisher. And so when I read the first one, I was working full time there, but then I left that job because of just the economy, and you know, it was a business decision. But they kept me on as the writer, so I continued writing the series. So the second one I wrote when I was between jobs, and then People of the Plague I started writing when I started my current job, which was back in 2014, I believe. So I was kind of, it was like my night job. It was writing these books, the second two books, because I had a day job. And I continued.
The second question is, why this particular segment of history? Forests, catastrophes, is that what basically interests you, or there is any other reason behind it?
Yeah, like definitely. I was tapping into like a kind of an interest in terrible stories, you know, frightening real stories. My editor at the publishing firm, it was her idea. The Horrors of History series was her kind of brainchild, and so I worked with her on coming up with a list of events that we could pitch to a publisher. And you know, the list included things like the Dust Bowl and the Andersonville Civil War prison and the Titanic. So they were all, you know, I guess the Civil War era stories were probably the oldest, but another like things like the Shirtwaist Fire, in New York City. And, you know, interestingly, like, I would have loved to have written about the Titanic, because that was when I was in sixth grade, that was the first like kind of like horrific event I remember really just being obsessed with, because this was, you know, many years ago, 1984. That was the year that they found the Titanic on the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean. And so I remember getting the National Geographic issue dedicated to telling the story of the Titanic, and it had all of these incredible full color photographs of the wreckage. And you know, it was the first time that we knew that the ship had actually broken in half as it sunk, which was incredible new information. But I became really, really interested in the people, the passengers' stories, because that must have just been an incredibly horrific, chilling experience, if you survived it. One of the first books I read was called A Night to Remember. I think that's like the gold standard in narrative books about the Titanic sinking. So it was by Walter Lord. That was the first book that I kind of explored, but I did read a number of them. And then, of course, when I was an adult, I watched a lot. There are a lot of Titanic movies as well, but of course, the most famous one being the Leo DiCaprio movie in 1997, was it? I think. But you know, the thing about that movie is that while it did include real people, like, you know, the head of the White Star Line, which is the company that owned the Titanic, and the captain of the ship, and a few notable passengers, the two main characters in that story were not real. They were fiction, which I thought was a shame, because there were some true real stories that could have been told. But of course, it's a Hollywood production, so they want to have a love story at the center. So to sell those tickets.
You would have done a better job than that.
My focus would have been elsewhere, but might not have made as much money.
Is there anything else coming our way? Are there any future plans from this?
I hope to, I would love to continue this series. It's been a few years, but I would love to work with my editor again on another round of books, because there are so many stories, you know, we could tell. When we were pitching ideas, in fact, I wrote up some mock chapters. Sorry, I wrote up some mock chapters. For example, for the Dust Bowl, which was there was a event called, it's referred to as Black Sunday, which was just this horrific dust storm that happened. It was basically because of over irrigation of the land in the Midwest. So windstorms would whip up these dust storms, and on this one particular Sunday, it was just blackness all around. The people couldn't see, visibility was zero, and it traveled as well. One incredible detail that I found when I was just researching this one, just for this one mock chapter, was that the cloud from Black Sunday actually traveled across the country very slowly, of course, and it weakened as it went. But it actually did make its way all the way to Washington, D.C. So there, you know, I wrote a mock chapter about that. That would be a really interesting full book to write. Also Andersonville Civil War prison, where some terrible atrocities happened. I wrote a chapter for that when we were pitching this series. So I would love to reconnect with. I'm still good friends with with the editor that I worked with, and I would love for us to reconnect on another series. But we don't have any firm plans in place right now.
Last question from me, in particular to Columbia, South Carolina. There are different versions going around what actually happened, whether
Yeah.
the retreating Confederate soldiers put the cotton bales on fire, or they were Union soldiers basically looting and burning, or it was a literally pure incident. What do you know?
Yeah.
Because I didn't read your comic book, so basically, so you definitely know more than me.
Right. So I worked with a professor on this who helped me kind of make those narrative decisions, but I really didn't come down too strongly on one side or the other. I tried to stick to what was known and what was the overwhelming, like, kind of historical consensus. So I left a little bit of ambiguity there so that it's open to interpretation, because you know the overwhelming consensus is where I landed, but there are still holdouts. You know, some people who still believe it was kind of like it was the Northern soldiers who burned, or that it was the Southerners who burned as they left.
All right, let's leave it to history.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
It will be debated forever. You know, it's the Civil War. We're never going to land somewhere on it. I mean,
Guys, any questions that you want to ask Mr. Anderson, especially? Veronica, go ahead.
Why did you pick the Spanish flu over other disasters in history?
I think, well, because for one, because it when we were researching, it was even 100 years, or at the time it was whatever 95 years later. There were still questions about this disease, where it came from, like how it transmitted from, like it's agreed that it started in birds, but they're not sure if it went to mammals before it came to human mammals. Many think it made a jump between birds and humans. But anyway, the bottom line is that medical historians and medical professionals, they were never able to fully solve this question about where it came from, and they have been concerned about something like this happening again. So to me, that was particularly scary, that these things are out there, right? And they are, like, we deal with these kind of epidemics periodically. In the last decade, we had H1N1, we had bird flu, but we had a different, better response to them than we're having now. We're a little bit more chaotic in our response right now. So I think just the unanswered questions about the 1918 influenza epidemic were particularly interesting to me.
Vitalik.
Will you plan to write a book about today's pandemic? Who will be your characters, doctors, patients, or religious leaders? And what lesson will they teach the society nowadays?
Yeah, that's a really good question. it would be very interesting to write about today. And I could see, I would want to, I would want to take a similar approach actually, because the conflicts between medical professionals and political decision makers are still there, but they have they have a more kind of there's just more chaos around, it seems like. But also, you know, like I presented in the book, you know, the nurses, the caretakers, the doctors, the people who were volunteering. Well, many it's their job, but there are also volunteers who are giving blood and lending a hand. Those accounts are incredibly interesting and touching and devastating to read about. So I would want to include those characters, and then also the people who are sheltering at home. People like us. Some of them are sick, some of them are not. Doing everything they can to stay safe and keep their families safe. So, you know, the big difference between now and then is that I have much more insight now into what day-to-day life is like just in a pandemic situation, you know, and the care you have to take when you go outside, you know, wear gloves, wear a mask, be mindful of what you touch, you know, those kinds of things I just have greater insight into now than I ever did when I was writing this. It seemed more foreign when I was writing it because it was history. It was 100 years ago. But like I said, history repeats itself, and we're going through through a similar situation now.
Viva?
But the thing is, sorry, just one last thing I'd say is, you need some distance from an event before you can really write about it with the most with insight and most awareness of what the results have been or were, and how it has impacted families, communities, the country, the political situation, and individuals. So a little distance you would have to have a little distance. I wouldn't start something tomorrow on this, maybe 5 years from now.
You have to digest it first.
Yes.
Vivan, what's your question?
Okay, so this is more of like a general question.
Mm-hmm.
So there's like this saying, history repeats itself. So why do you think that with all the current technology and modern medicine, we're like living through this pandemic again?
Excuse me. I think, well, because viruses, they mutate, right? And so even with like, for example, we don't have a flu vaccine, right? We have a flu shot, which is basically like an educated guess about what the flu this year is going to look like, right? But it's not a vaccine. So even with modern medicine, you know, there are mutations. It's like the viruses are like a snake that can just slither this way and that, right? And it's hard to get a grip on them. Or maybe a snake isn't the right animal, something slippery. And so it's always going to be a challenge, but the most important thing is to be prepared, right? And medical professionals are always on the lookout they're always looking ahead, you know, to what's coming down the pike, and making preparations for it. It's just that this time around, our national response has not been very competent or prepared, which is a shame, because this, I think, even though COVID-19 would definitely take lives no matter what we did, it's taking more lives than it really should.
Sonia?
Looking at the events that happened in history, what did it teach us, and how may the knowledge that we took from the before pandemics might help us today?
I don't know, you tell us.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that very well.
What did we learn?
Oh.
Right? Is that what you need? What
Yeah.
lesson did we learn from the previous?
Yeah, and what can we do to help?
Well, obviously, it looks like not that much.
I know it's a disappointing answer, I'm afraid, because like, you know, we did learn a lot, or the people that experienced it and that lived through it learned a lot. But sadly, because this event was, there are horrible things happening all the time, you know, not constantly, but, you know, in the course of a century, that this story got lost to history really until it was relevant again, which is recently. And it started being, you know, the Spanish flu started being talked about because it was relevant to the spread of COVID-19. So, like, I would just reiterate, I would say the best defense is preparation, is to be prepared, not just be prepared as like our medical professionals
King
being
Kong
prepared,
Bing Bong.
as a culture, as a society, to know that this stuff can happen, to not
The Hong
mistrust medical professionals who are saying that it's coming. You know, you have to have a certain degree of confidence in
I never asked.
your leaders.
We'll take last one, Mr. Anderson, because they will have another class shortly.
Sure.
Edik, you want to ask something? Go ahead.
Do you think that people learn how to deal with a pandemic after the Spanish flu?
I don't know, you figured that out.
Do I think, how do they learn about?
No, like, do you think people learned more about how to deal with a pandemic after the Spanish flu?
I'll say it, figure it out.
Yes, I think so. And the thing about a pandemic is that everybody is touched by it, really. Not everybody gets sick,
What you
but
want, mate?
everybody knows someone, or knows someone who knows someone in their community, someone in their church, someone in their school, whatever. So it touches everybody. So it's something that we all go through, that they all went through together, to varying degrees of intensity. So yeah, I believe culturally people learned a lot. It's just that those learnings did not continue through the generations necessarily. But hopefully we can change that this go round. You know, there's more ways
How are you
to
gonna change that, fool?
there's more ways to communicate than ever before. So, for example, if I do write another book, if I write a book on COVID-19 a few years from now, I will have a lot more source material to pour through.
Last question is, Mr. Anderson. Did you see the number of your books sale soared in the recent time? Because that's what they say. People are watching more Netflix movies related to it.
Yeah, hold on one second. I need to grab the doorbell.
Мистер Алекс,
Да.
Послушай, давай купим детям книги его, следующую книгу купим, и пускай он подпишет.
So sorry.
That's perfectly
Just in the door. I think it's a handy person coming in. But I actually don't know, but I'm very interested to find out if there has been an uptick, and not for money reasons, just I'm interested in whether people are finding the book more. I have been in touch with the publisher, just wondering if they have any way of kind of tastefully promoting the book. because it really is relevant right now, and it would be good for young people to find out about it and explore it.
All right. Mr. Anderson, we are sorry, but we have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we don't want basically to let you go, but we have to. So
I understand.
very appreciative for your time. It's been very pleasant experience.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Hope to see your books down the road.
I hope so too.
Maybe, hopefully, when times will be better, everything will settle down. We can invite you live and see you in person. It's cool.
Great.
And that will be it, guys.
Mr. Alex.
Yes.
Mr. Alex, I want to tell to Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, my friends Ala told me that you are amazing. It's right. You are amazing, and I know that people call you master of facts. It's true. You're a master of facts. And next, what I want to tell, I'll buy to my students one of your books for all my class, and I want you to sign this book. I think we will see you maybe in this situation, maybe when everything will be finished, and you will come to our school. Thank you very much for your coming, and thank you very much for what are you doing for everyone to know history of our country and everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd be happy to come visit in person whenever the show is over.
Okay, done. All right, guys. Thank you.
Have a great time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
You guys,
For your time.
Great to
you
know.
stay.
For your time.
You have your homework on E-class due Monday, plus reading chapter 11, lesson 3 for oncoming quiz.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Mr. Alex, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Nice to speak with you.